Dr. NightEchoes.
My daughter Lily started talking to her closet about 3 weeks ago. She called the visitor the hungry lady. At first, I thought it was just a normal kid thing. She told me the lady lived behind her winter coats and didn't have any skin on her face, just wet, red muscles that moved when she talked. It sounded gross, but kids have vivid imaginations. I told her the lady was just a story, and we went about our day. But Lily stopped playing with her dolls. She would just sit on the edge of her bed and stare at the closet door. She stopped eating her favorite snacks because she said the lady needed the food more. She started losing weight, and her eyes got dark underneath. Last night I was tucking her in. The room was unusually warm and smelled like copper. I was leaning over to kiss her forehead when Lily's body went completely stiff. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the space right behind my shoulder. Her voice went very flat and low, like she was repeating words someone was whispering directly into her ear. She told me the lady was standing right there. She said the lady liked my hair because it smelled like strawberries. Lily reached out her hand and touched my neck, but her fingers were shaking. She whispered that the lady wanted to taste it. I felt a sudden, sharp tug on my ponytail. It wasn't a ghost feeling. It felt like someone had gripped my hair with wet, slippery fingers and pulled hard. I didn't scream. I just grabbed Lily and ran out of the room. We spent the night at my sister's house. This morning I went back to get some clothes. I looked in the closet to prove to myself nothing was there. The coats were all pushed to the sides. On the back wall, right at my head height, there was a long, damp smear of saliva and a single strand of my hair stuck to the wood. I moved Lily's bed into my room, but I can't stop looking at the floor. There are wet, red footprints coming out from under my own bed now. I was cutting up some chicken for my 3-year-old, Leo, when he stopped eating and looked at the kitchen corner. He didn't look scared. He just raised his hand and waved. I asked him who he was waving at, thinking it was a fly or a shadow. He pointed his fork at the space between the fridge and the wall and said the man with no skin was back. He told me the man looked like a peeled orange and that he was shivering because he was so cold. I tried to laugh it off, but the kitchen suddenly felt like the air conditioner was turned down to 50 degrees. My skin went bumpy. Leo leaned closer to me and whispered that the man wanted to sit in the oven again to get warm. I looked at the oven. It was turned off, but I could hear a faint, metallic popping sound coming from inside, like the metal was expanding from high heat. I walked over and touched the handle. It was ice cold. I opened the door to show Leo nothing was inside, but a smell hit me immediately. It smelled like wet hair and scorched iron. The bottom rack was slightly bent downward in the middle, as if something very heavy had been crouching on it. When I looked back at Leo, he wasn't looking at the corner anymore. He was looking at the oven door in my hand. He told me the man was happy I opened it because it was too cramped in there with the door shut. We went to my mom's house for the night. I didn't even pack a bag. I just grabbed my keys and Leo and left the front door unlocked. I went back this morning to check the kitchen. The oven was still off, but the digital display was flickering wildly. I opened the oven door again, just to be sure. The interior light was smashed. There were no glass shards on the floor of the oven, but there were greasy gray smudge marks on the inside of the glass. They looked like the shape of a forehead and two palms pressed hard against the window from the inside. I haven't turned the stove on since. I'm sitting in the living room now, and I can hear the oven door in the kitchen slowly creaking open. My son Toby loves playing hide and seek, but he usually chooses obvious spots, like under the kitchen table. Yesterday was different. I had been looking for him for 10 minutes and couldn't find him anywhere. The house was dead silent. I finally went into the master bedroom and noticed the walk-in closet door was pulled shut. I pushed through the hanging clothes, expecting him to jump out and giggle. Instead, I found him curled into a tiny ball in the very back corner, pressed against the drywall. He was so still, I thought he wasn't breathing. When I reached out to touch his shoulder, he flinched and grabbed my wrist. His grip was surprisingly tight, and his palm felt clammy. He didn't look at me. He kept his eyes fixed on a small crack in the baseboard near his feet. He leaned in and whispered that I had to be quiet. He told me the man inside the wall was watching us through the gaps in the wood. According to Toby, the man had been talking to him the whole time I was searching. The man told him that the game had special rules today. Toby shook his head and his lips started to tremble. He whispered that the man said if I found him, the game would end, and the man would have to take both of us into the wall to keep him company. I felt a sudden, sharp draft of cold air hit my ankles, coming directly from the crack in the wall. I tried to pull him up, but I heard a sound that stopped my heart. It was a dry, scratching noise coming from inside the drywall, right behind Toby's head. It sounded like long fingernails dragging slowly against the back of the plaster. Then a low, wet, sliding sound followed, like something heavy and soft moving through a narrow space. I scooped Toby up and ran for the front door. We're staying in a motel now. I checked Toby's back while he was changing into his pajamas. There were 5 long, thin bruises stretching across his shoulder blades. They weren't from a hand. They looked like they were made by something with much longer, thinner fingers than a person should have. We were driving past that big, overgrown field on the edge of town when my daughter, Mia, told me to stop the car. She's only 4, but she was looking out the window with a look on her face that I've never seen before. It was like she was watching something very sad and very busy. She pointed a small finger at a cluster of dead trees and said that was where they put all the bodies. I tried to tell her it was just a field for cows, but she didn't blink. She said the men come out when the sun goes down and use long, heavy shovels to dig holes that never end. She told me the bodies they drop in don't have any skin left on their faces, so they can't cry out even when the dirt hits them. I felt a cold knot tie itself in my stomach. I asked her how she knew that, and she said the man under her bed told her. She said he's one of the ones who didn't get buried deep enough. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I waited until Mia was asleep and took a flashlight out to that field. I walked to the spot she pointed at. The grass was tall and sharp, but in one area the ground was sunken and soft. I stepped on a patch of dirt and my foot sank in deep. The smell that came up from the soil wasn't like dirt. It smelled like a butcher shop that had lost power in the middle of a hot summer. I looked down and saw something white sticking out of the mud. I thought it was a rock, but when I brushed the dirt away, I saw it was a set of human teeth, clamped shut. There were no lips or gums around them. Whew. I ran back to the house and checked on Mia. She was sitting up in bed, staring at the wall. She told me the man was mad that I went out there. She said he's coming back tonight to see if my skin fits him better than his own. Now, I can hear a wet, dragging sound coming up the stairs, and the smell of rot is filling the hallway. I was folding laundry in the living room when my daughter Chloe walked in from the kitchen. She wasn't crying, but she looked very pale. She told me there was a lady standing next to the stove. I figured it was just an imaginary friend, so I asked her what the lady was doing. Chloe said the lady was trying to scream at her, but she couldn't make any noise because she didn't have a mouth. She described it as just a deep black hole in her face that never ended. She told me the lady's throat was bubbling because it was completely stuffed with fat black beetles. Chloe said every time the lady tried to breathe, the bugs would crawl out of the hole and fall onto our floor. I walked into the kitchen to show her it was empty. The room felt heavy and the air was thick, like it was hard to pull into my lungs. I looked at the stove and the floor. Everything seemed normal at first. I told Chloe that the lady wasn't there and that she was just seeing things. But then I looked at the baseboards. There was a pile of dead, shiny beetles tucked into the corner, right where Chloe had pointed. They were crushed, and a thick yellow fluid was leaking out of them. I grabbed a paper towel to clean them up, but when I touched the floor, it was burning hot, like something had been standing there with a fever. That night, I woke up because I heard a wet, clicking sound coming from the hallway. It sounded like thousands of tiny legs moving on the hardwood. I looked over at my bedroom door and saw Chloe standing there. She wasn't looking at me. She was pointing at the ceiling right above my head. She whispered that the lady was tired of screaming and was just going to let the bugs out now. I looked up and saw a single, huge beetle fall from the vent. Then I heard a muffled, wet thud on the bed right behind my pillow. Something is heavy on the mattress, and I can feel a cold, empty wind blowing against the back of my neck. We were walking past the old orphanage on Oak Street yesterday. The building has been boarded up for years, and the bricks are covered in dead vines. My daughter, Maya, stopped walking and stared up at a small window on the third floor. She pointed a finger at the cracked glass and said there was a little boy standing there crying. I told her the building was empty, but she didn't move. She said the boy was really sad because the men were mean to him. She told me they made him stand in a small gap behind the bricks, and they didn't even let him put his shoes on before they sealed the wall up. She said his feet were blue from the cold stone. I felt a chill run down my spine despite the afternoon heat. I tried to pull her away, but she stayed frozen. She told me the boy was tapping on the wall with his knuckles because his fingernails were already gone. She said he wanted to know if he could borrow my shoes so he could walk out of the dark. I finally got her home, but she wouldn't stop talking about him. She sat by the front door and lined up all her sneakers in a neat row. She said the boy told her he was coming to get them tonight because he was tired of feeling the damp dirt under his toes. I woke up around 3 a.m. to a strange noise. It wasn't a ghost sound. It was a physical, rhythmic thumping. It was coming from inside my bedroom wall, right next to my head. It sounded like someone was hitting the drywall with a soft, bare heel. I turned on the lamp and looked at the floor. Maya's small shoes were sitting in the middle of my rug, but they were covered in wet, gray mud and tiny bits of old mortar. The thumping stopped. Then I heard a tiny, wet voice coming from behind the wallpaper. It whispered that the shoes were too small, and now it wants to try on mine. My son Sam was sitting on the kitchen floor playing with his blocks when he looked toward the basement door. He told me there was a lady standing there who was very sad. I asked him why, and he said it was because she couldn't find her head. He spoke about it like he was talking about a lost toy. He said her head was tucked inside a cardboard box in the basement, but she couldn't get to it because she didn't have any hands. He described her arms ending in smooth, wet stumps that kept sliding against the tape on the box. I felt a sick shiver go down my back, but I told him he was just being silly. I had to go down there later to do the laundry. The basement is always damp, but that night it felt freezing. I kept thinking about what Sam said. I looked over at the storage shelves and saw an old, unmarked box sitting right in the middle of the floor. I don't remember putting it there. It was sealed with thick, yellowed tape, but the cardboard was soft and soggy at the bottom. I reached down to move it, and I heard something shift inside. It wasn't a heavy thud. It was a soft, rolling sound, like a ball covered in wet hair hitting the side of the box. I bolted back upstairs and locked the door. That night, I heard a wet, slapping sound coming from the basement stairs. It sounded like skin hitting the wood over and over. I looked at the baby monitor and saw Sam sitting up in his crib. He was looking at the corner of his room and nodding. He whispered that the lady was happy I found her box, but she needed me to come back down and help her with the tape. He said she promised to show me what was inside if I gave her my hands to keep. I haven't left my room, but I can hear the basement door slowly creaking open downstairs. My son Leo was sitting on the rug playing with his blocks yesterday afternoon. He suddenly dropped his toy and looked toward the dark hallway that leads to the basement. His whole body went stiff. He didn't look scared. He looked annoyed. He pointed his finger and said, "Go back to the basement." I looked behind me, but the hallway was completely empty. I asked him who he was talking to, thinking it was just a kid being weird. Leo didn't look at me. He kept his eyes on the hallway and said it was the man with the hole in his head. He told me the man was standing right by the basement door and that he smelled like wet dirt and old worms. I felt a sharp prickle go up my arms. I asked him what he meant by a hole. Leo described it perfectly. He said there was a deep, jagged crack in the man's forehead, right above his left brow. He told me the man's eye was leaking a thick, gray liquid that ran down his cheek and dripped onto our carpet. Leo made a face and said the liquid made a splat sound when it hit the floor. I walked over to the hallway to show him nothing was there. The air near the basement door was freezing and smelled like a fresh grave. I looked down at the carpet where Leo was pointing. There was a small, damp circle on the floor that wasn't there 5 minutes ago. I touched it with my finger. It was cold and felt oily, like engine grease mixed with water. That night, I woke up because I heard a wet, dripping noise right next to my ear. Plip, plop, plip. I turned on my bedside lamp and looked at my pillow. There was a dark gray stain spreading across the white fabric. It smelled like rotting soil. I looked up at the ceiling, thinking there was a leak in the roof, but the ceiling was perfectly dry. Then I heard Leo's voice coming from the doorway. He was standing there in his pajamas, staring at the empty space at the foot of my bed. He whispered that the man was sorry for the mess, but the hole was getting bigger and he couldn't hold the gray stuff in anymore. My 4-year-old, Toby, started talking to the empty chair at the kitchen table about a month ago. He called his friend Sam. My husband and I thought it was cute, so we started setting a tiny plate for Sam during dinner. We joked about it for weeks until last Friday. We were all sitting in the living room and Toby was staring at the space right next to the recliner. I asked him what Sam actually looked like. Toby stopped playing with his trucks and looked at me with a very serious face. He said Sam was small, about his size, but he wasn't a kid. He said Sam's skin looked like gray clay, and his eyes were just big, oily black circles that never blinked. I laughed a little because it sounded so creepy, and I told Toby that Sam didn't sound like a very nice friend to have. The room went quiet instantly. The temperature dropped so fast I could see my breath in the air. Toby's face went pale, and he looked terrified. He crawled over to me, climbed into my lap, and put his tiny, cold hand over my mouth. He leaned into my ear and whispered that I had to be quiet right now. He said Sam didn't like being talked about like that. Then he leaned in closer, his voice shaking, and whispered that Sam was standing right behind my head, reaching out to touch my hair. I felt a heavy, localized weight press down on the back of my neck. It felt like a thick, blunt finger was dragging slowly from the base of my skull down to my spine. I couldn't move. I just sat there holding Toby while the air behind me smelled like old, stagnant water from a drain. I didn't turn around. I just got up and walked out of the house. We haven't mentioned Sam's name since that night, but sometimes when I'm brushing my teeth, I see a small gray handprint on the steamed-up mirror, right at the level of my shoulder.